Hello, my name is Chad Kassem from Acoustic Sounds and Analogue Productions, and today we're going to be talking about the legendary album Steely Dan Aja. And I want to thank everybody for joining us on this Zoom, because I know y'all real busy and everybody's got things going on, but we really appreciate you doing it. I think this is something that don't happen often, and we're really proud of everything that this album, and I don't really think anybody needs introduction on this panel, but I'm going to go ahead and do it. So we have we're going to welcome Donald Fagen, of course, from Steely Dan, Bernie Grundman from Bernie Grundman Mastering, the mastering engineer that mastered the original, and then 46 years later mastered this new version. Fred Kaplan, who's a writer for Tracking Angle and a columnist for Slate. And again, I'm Chad Kassem from Acoustic Sounds. We're going to have Bill Schnee join us any moment. Bill's a multi-Grammy and an Emmy award-winning engineer. He's got a book out called Chairman at the Board, which I don't do a lot of reading, but I've been reading it because it's things like that that interests me. I've been reading it, and he's got a chapter dedicated to Asia, and we're going to put a link at the bottom to talk about Bill's book in case anybody's interested in that. But I'm just going to ask one question, and I'm going to try to. The people that know me know I talk a lot, maybe way too much. I'm going to just get out of the way because this is my time to listen. But I just wanted to know, like, the first question I'll start it off with is, Donald, did you know that, like, when you were recording this, or you were getting towards the end, or you were finalizing Steely Dan Aja, did you have a clue that it would be one of the most legendary albums that's ever come out and be what it's become?
No, of course not. I think Walter and I just like on all our previous albums, we just went in with new material, and we'd heard about this cat Bill Schnee, who had this place, Producer's Workshop, at the time, and we started recording there. And he was fantastic. He really understood what we were trying to do, and he understood what hi-fi was, and it worked out great. And then also at the time, I think one thing that's not mentioned that often, but studio players, who were mostly session players, are the guys we knew. Larry Carlton, Steve Gadd, and so on, had by then figured out how to play both a jazz and rhythm and blues. Previous to that, you would find jazz player may not be the best person to be playing on a R&B record, because they just had a completely different conception of how to play it, and R&B players weren't necessarily the best jazz players. But the way the music education had evolved by then, the guys knew how to do both, and it was just like it was in the air that the way people played was a combination of both areas.
So in that sense, I mean, in that sense, was this? Maybe you didn't know this was going to be a classic, but did you sense that something new was going on in this session? That this was different from
well,
what
we sort of of a piece with what came before, but we were getting a little better at writing, and because we knew the musicians were evolving, I think the way we wrote was evolving. So we were writing pieces that could best use the talents of these new players.
Was anything influencing you?
Of course, you have no idea. We never thought about, is this going to sell a lot of records, or because you know, we had a few hit singles, but we were mainly interested in the album as a piece of art, you know.
What was the writing influenced by anything in particular? I mean, it is more sophisticated, both the lyrics and the.
Well, I think it just we were becoming more sophisticated in the way we wrote, and I think it gave us confidence knowing that we were going to use certain musicians that we had seen around town and so forth, you know, and we heard them on other records, and we could tell that the kind of stuff they could do was more varied, you know.
Bernie,
Yeah. I think that's true, especially in LA, because there was a lot of these musicians were studio musicians and they played all different types of music, but a lot of great players in LA. But I felt the same way when I first heard this album. I realized that the combination of kind of a jazz influence and then an R&B influence was definitely there, and it fit together well.
when
Yeah,
Bernie,
I think that's what we had in mind.
when you looked at when you went back to the tapes to master this latest reissue by Analogue Productions, did you have to do anything with it? Or did you pretty much leave it alone, or?
Well, in this case, since we had to work from a copy, it's a copy that I made that contained the mastering that I did at A&M when I was at A&M. That's where I was when I mastered it. However, the big difference in this new release is that, yes, the tape machine recorded what I was sending the cutting system and so forth, but this new release, the signal is now going from the copy tape, but now it's going through a new system that's kind of built by us. And it also contains other new advances in the whole cutting system, so that we can actually try to overcome whatever losses there are in a tape copy. A tape copy, copies always lose something. However, there were other things that were lost when it went from the console to the cutting system at A&M. I mean, we tried to have great systems then, but what we have now, even with this new diamond cutting stylus that we're using, the integrity of the cut is better. There's less high frequency loss toward the center of the disc. This release is at 45 RPM, which is definitely the faster the better with vinyl. So the quality, there's less that we didn't even interfere much with that tape because that was the original EQ and the way the original record came out. We just had a few compensations that we did to overcome some of the things that happen when you just make a tape copy, you know, but we have a special system, a signal path that was it was basically directly right from the tape through a vacuum tube preamp that we build, and it went right through the amount of compensation we did. We did some EQ and stuff, but that was all built into the playback system so that we didn't even go into a new piece of equipment. It was just done right in the playback system, right, and then we went direct into the cutting system. So that overcame a lot of the stuff that would normally be lost.
So it's kind of the straight wire with gain.
That's it. That's basically what we were doing. So we were able to capture, actually, I think more maybe than what originally came out at 33 RPM, of course. But now we've got a lot of things that are overcoming any little losses and stuff. And the tape that I was working from is the exact equalization and levels and everything that went on the original disc, except now it's the whole signal path, and the way we recorded it is without almost nothing in between.
Donald, you thought several years ago that all of the original master tapes from the Steely Dan period were missing. You know, Chad found most of the original tapes. This one, and also, I guess, Gaucho also, it's a copy of the original. But,
that's right.
But I mean, do you know what happened to the original? Do you have any notions of?
Well, you know, at this point, it's a real tangle of thorns. I'm not sure exactly what happened, because I remember originally we were told that a couple tunes were missing. A couple of the 2 tracks had never been returned to Universal or something like that. And then of course we heard about this fire at Universal, and you know, we got different reports on that. Some said, well, everything's fine, and then others says, well, we have copies, or they said, and then some people said, no, everything like burned. So I never got the story straight.
No, there were a lot of weird
happened.
stories going on about that. Most of them
Well,
not.
Yeah, some of them were over exaggerated. I
Yeah,
mean,
yeah.
like they said, a lot of tapes were missing that we actually used, that so they still have a lot of, and in the case of Steely Dan, I would feel really very happy because the first 5 were the absolute original masters. Gaucho and Asia are the best tape copies you could get. One's a Bob Ludwig EQ'd master, one off, others the Bernie Grundman original. And then even the last 2 albums, we had originals on everything except
Did you have
those
a hard time? Did you have a hard time finding these things, or was it like a big investigation? Or
No. I mean, we kind of heard rumors or stories, like even way before the fire, like for some reason, Steely Dan had some like some folklore or whatever you want to call it, that maybe the tapes weren't around or something. So we were real nervous. And I mean, of course, like I do with every deal I make, I say, hey, listen, this is only a deal as if we can get the original master. We're not
Right.
taking copies. We're not taking digital. And, you know, a lot of the labels push very, very hard. And I had the whole Doors catalog, and at the last minute, they said, well, all we're giving you is high res, and I was going to walk away. So I get it clear that I'm only going to use the masters, and boom, they sent me an email. Here's the pictures. And I'm like, well, you know, we asked them to double check on the Asia and the Gaucho, and they reassured us they had. And it really wasn't that much of a fight or a battle or to beg them, or they came across real quick with it. So I was, of course, like, wow, let's get started.
Well,
so,
one of
yeah, I remember at the time when we first heard there may be some missing tunes or something. Walter and I offered the fantastic sum of $600 as a reward, and we never got one bite.
yeah. Well, one of the problems with
Maybe we
an
should have, you know, raised it to 750 or something. like
yeah,
that.
yeah, maybe that was the
Inflation.
key. But you know, an album that's that famous, a lot of people are like using it for various things. I think is what happens is, and these tapes get sent out somewhere, and then they forget that they're out, and then nobody knows what happened to them, and they didn't keep good records in a lot of these libraries, is what we've found out through the years. Is
And
that
some of the studios closed. Where
yes,
you would have stuff. Like I remember A&R, there were some tapes in their library there, and then A&R closed down. And when studios closed down, it's really hard to find what they had. I know that because I owned a studio at one point, and we ended up with a whole bunch of tapes we didn't even know who to send them to.
yeah. Well, we have a whole basement full of tapes,
I bet.
things that never made it, you know, and names that you've never heard of before, and we don't know what
So,
to do.
you remember the whole Blue Note revival in the 80s. They had Michael
Look,
Castillo
oh,
go
and
into the
that guy,
vaults.
Bill,
There he
Bill
is.
Schnee.
Hey there.
How you
Yeah.
doing?
So sorry I'm late.
No problem.
Hey, better late than never, man.
Hey, Bernie.
Hey, yeah, hi. How you doing?
Great.
Nice to see you.
So I have a question for you, Bill. Donald, when we were asking him a few minutes ago what was different about Aja compared with other things, and one thing he said was different was that you, as the engineer, understood the kind of hi-fi sound that they were going for.
Right.
Can you, what does that mean exactly? I mean, were you doing on Aja things that you had done on other records, or was this something new for you as well? And what was it?
Well,
What
my
was that
question,
distinct thing?
I'd love to answer that question by asking a question of Donald. how they got to me. I read somewhere that you had said, Donald, that somebody had been made aware of the direct-to-disc records I had done, which were
Yeah,
very
I think that's correct. I
yeah.
don't remember precisely, but it sounds familiar. Yeah.
Yeah. So Doug Sachs had done, he actually did, Bernie will remember all of this. He actually did a direct-to-disc record when he first opened his mastering studio, because that great studio was right behind his place, Producer's Workshop. And he actually, his partner, Lincoln Mayorga, it was just some arrangements of his, and they did it to show off the mastering, which if you know, real quickly, direct to disc means that compared to how records were being made then, you didn't go to analog tape twice, only once. I mean,
I think we had a copy of the Lincoln Mayorga.
Yeah. And then so anyway, it was all done for hi-fi purposes to show off his mastering, which was really cheating. But anyway, they did the Lincoln Mayorga one that Donald said that they found of me, I engineered. And after that, I asked to produce one with a vocalist. And it took me 2 weeks to talk Doug into letting me do it, 2 months to get Lincoln to let me do it. But I was always aimed at high fidelity, and those records really showed it off. So, and I always thought it was interesting that when Gary Katz called me, he didn't, I mean, he just said, "Where do you want to record it?" And I said, "Well, the studio I like the most is this little teeny place behind the mastering lab." And he said, "Okay, fine."
Yeah, well, a lot of us came to this business, period, because of sound quality of
Right.
recordings that we heard that were extremely impressive and sounded so natural and so real that you built a big interest in it because it actually added this extra dimension and experience to the music, a better connection that you can have with the music.
Yeah, for sure. Me personally, I got that early on in my band. I started in a band right out of high school. We recorded, our first deal was with Decca. We recorded at Capitol Studios and Western as well. And then our second record deal was with Richie Podler in a little funky rock studio in the Valley. But when I went in for the first playback, I heard and felt something in the music that I had never heard or felt in those other studios. And it was the same band. And that was my aha moment when I went, wow, it really makes a huge difference. And I had come from the world of hi-fi, as you did and as Doug did. So.
Well, like when I was like 14 years old or something like that in the mid 50s, that was one of the things that changed my life because that's when hi-fi was just coming out. Actually, there's no stereo then, and I was in Phoenix, Arizona. That's where I was raised, and there was a hi-fi shop that all of a sudden there was this hi-fi shop that I would go by on my little Cushman motor scooter, and I thought, gee, I'm and of course it attracted me right away because all the hobby things were there. You know, all the speakers were lined up on shelves and stuff. That people were building their own cabinets and things like that. That was the birth of high fidelity and the interest in high fidelity and what it could do for music and the experience of it. So I went in one day and the guy that was running this, I was drooling over all this equipment. There was a Mac 30 in there that had just come out. And so I was like looking at everything and he said, "Hey, do you want to hear something?" I said, "Yeah, sure. I'd love to." Because I was only listening to my dad's 78s. So he put this record on. It just shocked me. I had no idea that you could buy something and play it and get that kind of sound. And from that day on, that was it. I was like sold. And I stayed with it, you know, for all that time. And finally was able to even go to work for the label that I was most impressed with at that time, Contemporary Records. That was my first job in Hollywood, was working at Contemporary. Never did I think that would happen, but I was so passionate about it. What's that?
Roy Dunan and
yeah, Roy. Well, I no. See, I I actually met Roy Dunan in person in Phoenix because he had moved there when I got out of the service in the 60s. I called that studio there called Audio Recorders, and I said, gee, I really need to know more information about how I can become a recording engineer. And they said, well, you ought to talk to Roy Dunan. And I said, Roy Dunan, he's there? And they said, yeah, his wife has health problems and he's living in Phoenix now and he's working at our studio. And I said, I'll be right down. So I went down and I talked to the owner. I knew the owner because I had done some recordings and stuff before I went in the service, and they had like a Presto cutting system and very primitive thing, but I had done a few recordings and things like that. But I walked in there and I went into the guy that owned it, who I'd met before, but I said, look, I got to work here. I said, like, you don't have to pay me, I don't care, I got to be where Roy is. And so they said, well, yeah, you can do that. And I said, I'm at Arizona State University finishing my engineering degree, so I'll just come in whenever I can. And he said, fine, so I hung out with them. And then through him, though, I met Howard Holzer, who had a place to build consoles and build cutting systems in Van Nuys. And when I heard about him, I hopped in my car and I drove right over to Van Nuys and walked in. And this is a very important thing for me, because when I walked in and met Howard, he was like in a t-shirt, eating soup out of a soup pan, and he had this beautiful cutting system behind him. And he wasn't working at Contemporary anymore. And I walked in and I had a suit and tie on, of course. I was trying to make a good impression. And I said, look, I'm just trying to learn more about what I need to do to be a recording engineer and this and that. And he said, look, he says, if you love your work, you'll find a way. And I thought, wow. I said, gee, that is good advice. He says, why don't you take the job over at Contemporary? They don't have anyone. I says, I don't know anything yet. I've only been fooling around winding cables for the last 3-4 months. This was in the springtime. And I said, but I thank you for the advice and all that. So I got my car, drove back to Phoenix. So, but then about a couple months later, I thought, I started hanging around with Roy, and when they had 2 cutting systems there at this studio, and they were doing a lot of cutting and pressing in Phoenix. And so I said, I called up Howard and I said, Howard, look, do you think you can get me an interview with Lester at Contemporary? And he said, yeah, I'll be happy to do it. So I didn't think anything of it, but way into August, when I'm getting out of school, I called him up and I said, Howard, did you get me that interview with him? And he said, oh, I got you the job. When can you start? And I said, what? I mean, this is really one of those American stories where I was so ambitious that they were just like, okay, So, but in September I was, then I drove right over there, and Howard, Lester said, hey, I don't need to know anything more. Howard says, you're great. When can you start? So September, I had my car and a trailer and all my belongings and stuff, and headed for Hollywood. So that's kind of my story, but I was just so anxious to get going and get into what I was passionate about.
So Donald, were you a hi-fi guy? I know that some of the notes on the albums talk about using German microphones, and I think one session you had Magnapan speakers as the monitors. Was that you, or was that mainly Walter? Or
Well, Walter's dad was a hi-fi guy. He used to build kits, stuff like that. He was into it. Previous to meeting Walter, though, I somehow got a hold of one of those, like in junior high school or something, one of those Enoch Light and the Light Brigade stereo
yeah.
test track. It was like the idea was to demonstrate stereophonic sound, and they were called things like provocative percussion, things
I
like
remember
that.
those. Yeah.
Remember those?
Yeah.
And, they had this like they would pan everything hard right and left, and you'd hear the bongos on one side, and then some kind of glockenspiel on the other side.
Yeah.
And so I love those records, and I thought, wow, how come all records don't have this kind of sound? And so when Walter and I got together, we both had a certain interest in sound. I think maybe Walter he knew more about about it from a technical point of view.
So, Bill, I have a question. In your book, which I was chairman at the board, at one point you were talking about recording Aja, and Donald and Walter asked if you'd be interested in mixing. And you said, well, I don't know. Let's give it a try. And you talk about how, they just got into it too much. It just went on forever. And they would say, what have we tried this? What have we tried that? What have we tried this? Do you have any specific memories of what these things were? Because in the end, it all worked out. But
No,
I think it sounded different from what you heard when you finished recording it. But do you remember some examples of this?
it didn't sound different, did you say?
Oh, I think it probably did sound different. Or
Not
maybe it
that
didn't.
much.
You're the one who heard the recording and the subsequent LP.
Not that much, actually. That was the great, one of the best things is that the tracks were so superb. And I know they spent months working on it, but and, second engineers, they all manage late at night. They do things that they've been told not to do. And it was only about five or 6 years ago that one of the second engineers at the studio at the time told me that he had made copies of some of the tracks as we had done them. And so he gave them to me. And then I got mad at him. Well, why didn't you get all of them? But anyway, including the first version of Peg. But the tracks are all of the overdubs. It's nothing. It was nothing about, which happens so often. People get a great feeling track and then they start adding and adding and adding, and at the end it becomes something different. Sometimes better, oftentimes not. But the basic feeling of everything was absolutely in the basics. And here was the situation.
We used to like to overdub until we completely destroyed the rhythm track. Anyway, I'll be right back. I got to get a cable so this thing doesn't die.
Sure.
The situation was this. They came to me when we finished the tracking and said, we're going to go off and do overdubs for a few months. We'd really like you to mix it. And I said, I'm not sure that I'm the guy for that. And I don't think it would work. And he said, what do you mean? And this was based on me talking to people that had worked on previous records and knowing about their passion for getting it the way they wanted it. And two things are at play there. The first one is that at that time, this is before any kind of computer help with mixing, which was fine because I mixed for a performance. So, I would get the balance, the basic kind of balance, the way I thought it should be. And then as a take went down, I would start learning what I could do to manipulate things to make it feel good. And so I very seldom would mix in edits the way some people did, mixing a verse, then a chorus and that kind of thing. So it was all about a performance, and doing a lot of takes, was, trying this and trying that was, kind of went against that. But they said that day, you said, well, you'll try it, won't you? And I said, sure. So I think it was about 6 months later, they called me up, and they had Peg, not Peg, Josie, when Josie comes home. And I went and into a studio, and I can't remember if Donald, only one of them showed up with Gary. And I had it the way I thought it should be. And they came in and listened and said, it sounds really good. And then we started in on the process of trying and trying and trying. And several hours later, I think they realized that it wasn't working for me. And so, I turned to him and said, look, you got a phenomenal album here. It's going to be great, however it gets done. I'm just not the guy for it. I wish I was. And in fact, and for me, it was a couple of years later that we started with moving fader automation. And the first one was from England and Neve, and it was real stodgy. It wasn't super accurate. The faders felt horrible. And I was all about, I gave up playing. I was a keyboard player, and I gave up playing early on for the console to be my instrument. And so the movement of the faders meant a lot to me, as I said, since I'm mixing for a performance. And even though the computer would hand it back to you, it wasn't very accurate and so on. So, but people started demanding that, and I had to learn to let the computer help me, because it wasn't helping me. It was a hindrance for a little bit of time. And when I finally, and by the time I built my studio and put George Massenburg's system in, which was much better system, I had learned how to let it do that for me.
Donald, do you agree with that? It's sometimes you just keep adding, improving, but then at the
I
end of
wouldn't
the
call
day-
it improving
That's
necessarily.
right, but at the end of the day, it's not that big of a difference.
I have no memory of Bill, of that mix down with Bill. Maybe I blocked it after the time.
I said while you were gone, I can't remember if it was you or
Oh,
Walter. If
might
you
have
don't
been
remember
Walter.
it, maybe it was Walter.
right. Could have been.
Well, I remember one story. I first met Donald when I was doing a profile of him for the New York Times when he was making Morph the Cat. And I was sitting in on one mixing session, and Donald would say things like, bring up the flute 1/4 of a dB, or bring down this by 1/2 dB. And he left the room at one point, and I turned to Elliot and I said, 1/4 dB have to be, is this going to be audible to anybody by the time it's on CD? And he said, nah. But you know what? At the end of the day, after doing all these minute adjustments and this and that and that and this, it sounded better. The mix of it sounded better. Maybe I was kidding myself. I don't know. But I think something is going on.
Man, I love Morph the Cat. The sound quality of that is just, it's up with any
Oh,
of the
thanks.
others. Yeah, it's great. Did you do that at Avatar?
Most of it, yeah.
Yeah, I know an engineer, Katsu Nito, that worked there. Great studio, man. And they cut that at Kevin Gray cut that. I sold the hell out of that record, man. It audiophiles love it. And I love the music.
Oh, thanks very much, Chad. I mean, I'd like to thank all you guys for your part in doing what you're doing now and what you did back then, because it meant a lot to us to have people who really understood high fidelity and what we were trying to do.
It always takes a team, it's always a team, and somebody has to know, Bernie has to be the best mastering and Bill recording, and then we have to have the best musicians, and then I can take it from there, but I can't do, I wish I could play an instrument. I wish I could do
A lot
these
of times,
things.
because what we were used to is like, for instance, over at ABC Dunhill, they had a state-of-the-art studio built there, and then but once in a while we hear this hum or buzz, and we say, "Hey Phil, come on in here. You hear this? What are we going to do about this buzz?" And usually we'd hear, "What buzz?" So working with you guys was a whole
Yeah,
different.
if he hears the buzz, that means he has to do something about it.
Of
So he
course,
doesn't.
that means work.
That's
You may have to stay late. Who knows?
yeah, right.
Yeah, but Chad, you everything you mentioned is right. But let me tell you that on Asia, they came in every day with a piano bass demo of the song that was perfect. In fact, if you remember, Donald, on more than one occasion, somebody in the band would say, "Why don't you just overdub the drums on this? It feels incredible." And
Well,
and they all
the
did.
way I hear it is probably a little different, but because to me a lot of them were pretty crude. But once in a while we hit it.
Yeah.
How long did it take to record Asia? Do y'all remember?
The song?
No, just the album.
The song, the whole album, I don't exactly. It was about a year, I would imagine.
Yeah.
Oh, really?
Wasn't we weren't doing it all the time. But,
Oh, so y'all do like a song at a time, couple songs?
yeah, I think we went to New York to do a few at with Elliot Shiner over at A&R.
Generally, were these songs completely written by the time you went into the studio, or were you still tweaking and revising them, changing some lyrics or adding a verse?
They were, pretty well laid out. I think, there may have been some changes, but we'd work it over with the band, and Joe Sample would say, "How about if I do this?" And Larry Carlton would, come up with the part, and Walter would show Chuck Rainey some idea he had and that kind of thing, But we had charts though, prepared.
Can you talk a bit about working with Bernie Prudy? I mean Purdy?
Well, Bernard was a character, and so
Who was the drummer on several of the tracks? Yeah.
he's a big guy, and he was, you didn't want to necessarily have a confrontation with Bernard, but he was always great with us. I remember I remember doing a track with him. First take, he comes in and starts putting on his overcoat, and we're saying, "Bernard, the other guys haven't got the chords under their fingers yet," and Bernard says, "Well, I was perfect." And so it took a bit to convince him to continue with a few more takes,
Didn't he have
People
a
don't really understand about what it takes to really come up with a complete album and all the work that goes into it? Because I'll even mention it to people. I'll say, "Yeah, that album took 6 months," or blah, blah. And they say, "What do you mean? We see it on TV and they're all in the studio recording it. It only takes 5 minutes, 10 minutes." I says, that's not the way it really works, but it is.
Depends on the music though. Bob Dylan used to go and record, and however long the album is, that's about how long he played.
Not that it can't happen.
Different kind of
It could happen.
music. Different kind of, a long time ago, in the
Yeah.
60s.
Yeah. Well, yeah, a lot of in the 50s, they used to go direct to the recording, do the whole thing at one time.
Yeah, sure.
Well, if it's solo artists, it makes it a lot easier too to
Yeah.
do it quick.
True.
Yeah, it's just him and an acoustic guitar, so.
But
Yeah.
didn't Purdy, I read someplace that he said, maybe this isn't true, he set up a couple of signs next to the,
Oh, yeah. He had when we come in, he had his drum set up, and there was a sign on the left that said, "You done it." And on the other side, it said, "You done hire the hit maker, Bernard Purdy."
It's hard to argue with that.
Yeah. He was a confident person. Still is, as far as I know.
how did you go about, I mean, you had, starting, I guess, I think it was starting with Aja, maybe one before, but you started bringing in different musicians for each track as opposed to a standard band. Do you remember any specific cases of how some of the choices were pretty obvious given the availability and the effect, but do you remember how you happened to pick some? And did you make lots of sample tracks?
By the time we were doing Asia, we started as a 5-6 man band, whatever. But because we were employees over at ABC as staff writers, we got to see a lot of sessions. Like Steve Barry would be cutting sessions from early in the morning, till the evening, and we'd see all these musicians come in, Jim Gordon and Joe Osborne and Larry Carlton, all these people, and we loved the way they played. So we said, let's add some of these people in to our band, which wasn't particularly popular with the guys in our group, but luckily it was not a democracy. It was a dictatorship run by Walter and myself. So.
Yeah, I know that when Gary Katz called me about doing recording the next record, he said it's going to be a revolving door of drummers. So you'll be getting a new drum sound every few days. And I said, that's fine. And I don't know if you remember, Donald, because we did have new drummers every couple of days. uh, were there certain tracks that were assigned to different people, or was it just happenstance what was given out?
Mostly, I guess what I was trying to come to was that by the time we did Asia, we kind of researched players. We'd actually listen to records they played on and stuff like that, and tracks we really liked. We'd say, who's that drummer? Who's that bass player? So and then we just called those people.
And
It
the other
wasn't,
thing,
it wasn't necessarily per song, but we wanted to have a variety of people come in.
yeah. And I never, maybe you can answer this one. I never knew why Jeff wasn't one of them, since he played on 2 previous records.
I think
Jeff being,
Jeff Picaro. I think there was a scheduling problem at the time. I think
That's what I would guess.
yeah, he was when he was like 19, he was the drummer on the Sonny and Cher show. It was like he was busy from when he was very young, and so that might be it. I think he may have even been starting the Toto group that he was in.
how did you get Wayne Shorter? Was that a challenge?
Yeah, I think when we first asked him, we didn't get a reply, but over at Village Recorders, the manager there, Dick LaPalme, knew Wayne, and he interceded for us and played him a few things. And then, so Wayne said, yeah, I'll try it out. And he came over, and we had a great time with him just for the day he was there.
I mean, you've already recorded all the previous stuff and he's just listening to headphones and plays his solo and
Yeah. At
that's
one
it?
point, he said, I want to go. He went over to the piano and wrote some scales down because the thing he had to do in Asia was not that simple. There's a lot of chord movement, so he
Mhm.
wrote some stuff down and then came back and did another take, and it was great.
Wow. That is a pretty long saxophone solo for a pop record.
Well, it's not only long, but it's got some chromatic action.
Yeah. Right.
You think?
So he did a first take of that and he wasn't satisfied and he decided to make it.
It's not the kind of thing you want to sight read. I mean, he could do it, but to get a really good solo, he just wanted to live with it for like a half an hour at the piano.
He wrote it at the piano. Okay.
Speaking of Asia, I talked to Michael Lamardian fairly frequently, and we were talking about that. It was one of the longest rehearsals before we hit record, but it was only 2 takes.
Yeah, it was 2 takes, as I recall too. Yeah.
Yep. And do you remember that? Did you edit the 2 takes together? Did you just go with the one?
I believe we did. I think it was sort of almost the first half we took from 1 take, and we thought maybe the drum solo was better the second time, so we used but it was, I mean, they were both great takes.
Yeah, they were. And do you happen to remember, because I don't and Michael doesn't, which take that you ended up using, that portion of, had the click sticks? Was it the first take or the second?
I don't remember, but
isn't that funny? None of us remember. But
it didn't, that kind of thing didn't bother us,
yeah. But boy,
if
fans
it was being played beautifully, that kind of thing didn't bother us.
Yeah.
So Bernie, when you mastered the original album of this, right?
Yes.
And I mean, do you remember doing much with it then? With the tape?
Well, it was, the mix was really quite good, of course. I mean, something like that's that good. There might be some adjustments and so forth. Now, I had a little bit of trouble when they came in. I really hadn't worked with that group before, and they had their own speakers that they wanted to use. and they were German speakers, something they had picked up in Germany or whatever, and they wanted to hear the tape on their speakers. And I thought, well, okay. I said, I'm not used to, I mean, I kind of need to know by my speakers, but let's see what they sound like. Well, it sounded fantastic. In fact, it sounded too good. It was too detailed. It was too punchy, and I thought, that's odd, you know? And I said, let me listen to them on my speakers. And right away, though, it wasn't as detailed as I thought it should be. Now I'm just thinking about how it's going to sound over most sound systems. I mean, there are some speakers that are extra detailed, there are that are extra good. And the thing is, even if I EQ something and make it sound a little more like that on my speakers, they still sound good on the other speaker that was good from the beginning. You don't really notice
I
that.
remember what you did when using your speakers.
Uh-huh.
It made it sound better on your speakers, but didn't materially change that much when we went
No.
back to most speakers.
No, you're right. The only thing that it was just a little bit, and my speakers, I think, went a little bit lower in frequency.
Yeah, the bass response was
There was a little bit of muddiness down there and so forth, and that's what I was EQing. I was just trying to detail the bottom, just make it a little more detailed, so that it would be more detailed on a big system. So
yeah, I still have trouble hearing the bottom in working in a studio. You know, it's like they switch from speaker to speaker.
well, bottom's the most
different.
is a difficult area. It is a difficult area. Bottom is in fact, what you came in with is what I like to hear, though. I would rather have more bottom than I would like, because bottom, it's very hard to add bottom because there's no detail in that. The detail is in the high frequency of the bottom, is the plucking of the guitar, of the bass instrument, or the attack of the kick drum or whatever. And when you take away some of the bottom, it makes it more detailed and more dynamic, and it actually comes at you in a better way, because now the transient can come right out of the speakers. So even with hip hop stuff and things like that, it isn't that a lot of guys will come in and say, well, we want more bottom, I say, well, if you want it to sound like it has more bottom, we need more detail on the kick so that it comes at you, it jumps out of the speakers. And it's true, because I'll tell them that. They'll say, don't mess with the bottom. I'll say, yeah, it might sound good in the studio, but you won't be able to play it on a boombox. The speakers are going to start fluttering and stuff, in which they do. They'll come back the next day and say, yeah, you're right, I can't turn it up. So, but when that bottom gets detailed, it also opens up the mid-range too, and you have presence on everything. It gives you a lot more presence. So, but that's why I would rather have a little too much bottom, so I could take it away.
Exactly.
Expose the detail to the voice and everything else, and separate everything. And that's what I heard. That's about it too. That was the only thing, was I felt that we could like maybe make that a little more detailed on the bottom, and not and get rid of some of the muddiness on bigger speakers, because those speakers were smaller. They were like 8-inch or 10-inch woofers, I think. And so that low bottom wasn't showing up on that, but it would on a big system.
And the thing also, if there's too much bottom, it takes up so much space sometimes.
That's right. You can't cut a loud disconnect.
Everything else kind of recedes into the background.
Yeah. That does limit the amount of level you can put on, especially in those days in the computers for the cutting systems and stuff. You have too much bottom, it won't sound loud if you have a lot of bottom, because it'll take up the space on the record, because that's what takes up space on a disc is bottom.
Yeah.
Well, you know, this new UHQR pressing, 45 RPM. So when I first got it, you know, I played a couple tracks from the original pressing, which I have a copy of, and then this. And I mean, from the interesting thing about this reissue, you know, some reissues that are good go, wow, that's really better bass, or that's really better cymbals, or that. This was like more vivid everything from top to bottom and in between. And yet it didn't sound, too clean or anything. It also had all the emotion, all the warmth, And so is this because, I mean, you know, it's true, the quality of vinyl back in the day when Aja came out, it wasn't very good vinyl, period. This is high quality vinyl, 45 RPM, better mastering equipment. I mean, is that what's creating this sensation?
That was the object too, was to overcome the fact that we were using a copy. And the
Yeah.
copy already had the EQ on that I wanted originally from way back. And so
Mhm.
what I had to do though is we had to do some equalization and so forth, but we did it in such a way that we didn't have to add like an equalizer to it. We actually built it into the system because we wanted to do as little processing as possible.
What do you
And we
mean built it into the system? What does that mean?
we actually were controlling the curves coming out of the tape machine.
Oh, I see.
We weren't putting, like, a lot of times you have an outboard equalizer, but that means it has to have a line amp, it has to have all this other stuff. We didn't do it that way. We did it right in the preamplifier that we built for the playback of the tape. And that went direct to the lathe, and we adjusted the level that we put on the disc on the preamp that's always there. And very simple, basic vacuum tube preamp that we build ourselves. So
And that's uniquely for this tape.
yes, and that way we could avoid going through a lot of different equipment, and because any piece of equipment that it goes through, you're going to lose some quality.
Yeah, people a lot of times underestimate just going through a lot of electronics, how that can degrade.
Oh yeah, it can change the whole naturalness of the sound. We want natural sound, as natural as we can get it, if we can. Now, fortunately, these mixes were so good that we could just enhance it, and that was the beauty of it. And that's why when I first even put this tape up, when I first heard it, I thought, oh my God, this thing is like way beyond what I usually hear. This is going to set a new standard, is the way I felt about it. And that doesn't happen very often.
Hey, I got to leave it about 5 minutes. You want me to answer any important questions?
Bernie or Bill, you must have questions that have been
problems in the Middle East you want solved.
Yeah, let's do that one. Yeah.
Start there, yeah.
I mean, have you wondered anything all these years, Bill, about one thing or another? Well, you've asked some of the questions.
Yeah, I think I've gotten them all out, fortunately. Yeah. Oh, I got one other one. Why didn't you ever hire me again? But rhetorical.
No, eventually we moved back to New York, so there we were.
Would you have been willing to get on a plane?
I could have got on a plane.
We loved everything you did, so that's a good question. I'll have to think about that.
I have a question. FM. We cut a track with Keltner, and I heard that when you started on the overdub process, you went back and actually used your piano bass demo and overdubbed drums.
True.
And who was that, Jeff?
Yeah, I don't remember doing it with Keltner, but if you say we did, I'll take your word.
Excuse me. Yep, we cut a track with Keltner.
We ended up having Jeff just overdub on the demo. Anyway, guys, I gotta go.
But can I have one more question? So Donald, you're preparing to make a new album. Are you going to put that out on vinyl?
I'd love to.
Oh,
sure.
You have to nowadays. Everybody wants vinyl.
Yeah, got to. It's like making videos when MTV first came out.
Nobody even wants CDs anymore. It's high-res downloads and LPs, and that's about it.
Hey, we just built another cutting room. There's so much business.
Wow, that is great. It's great to hear, because that means people are like listening again to on good equipment instead of texting their girlfriend or.
Well, yeah, we hear all of these stories now. It's like people what they didn't realize is that to play a disc, you have to stop what you're doing and pay attention.
Sure.
Pay attention. So now you have to go through this ritual of putting it on the turntable and all that. And you might even like really get more out of the music.
Yeah,
'Cause
you gotta slow down.
yeah, because you're actually, you know,
You know, somebody
paying
told me,
attention.
Not only that, you got to listen on speakers
yeah,
Yeah,
instead of
yeah.
earbuds. How
Instead
about
of those
that?
tiny little earbuds.
you know,
Yeah,
a few people have told me,
we even hear stories about all these kids get together and they listen to records together. What a
Wow.
deal. What?
a few people have told me, I don't like 45s because I have to get up too often to turn over the record. And I'm thinking, you're listening to a record. What else have you got to do? Really? It's too much trouble to stand up after 12 minutes and turn over the damn record? I mean, really?
Anyway, thanks a lot, guys. I gotta sign out.
Hey,
But,
Donald, I
I'll
want
watch
to
the
thank
whole
you.
thing, when it comes out.
Yeah, I want to thank you for everything and doing this interview. I really do want to thank you sincerely. And
And right back
really
at you.
appreciate
Thanks a lot, guys.
okay, buddy.
Yes,
I love
sir.
you. Bye.
Bye, Donald.
He's gone.
All right. Well, I had a couple of questions for Bernie and Bill. We asked Donald the question, and then Donald answered. Donald answered it as he said, you know, when we asked him, hey, when you first, you know, when you were making this album and you were getting finished, ready to release it, did you know it was going to be the hit it was, you know, one of the most classic albums of all time? Did you have any clue? And I think he said, no, we made a lot of records before and they were good. And I didn't really see it coming, but I'd like Bernie to tell me what he thought while he was mastering. And then, because both Bernie and Bill, y'all have done some of the biggest records ever, many of them, you know, Grammy Award winning, everything. So y'all had a lot y'all heard before and after. So I'd like your impression what you thought when you heard it, Bernie, and then Bill can
Well, I
answer.
think that the difference in this recording, I mean, yeah, I'm used to doing a lot of albums, maybe 200, 250 albums a year, maybe, because the mastering engineers, we go through a lot of different things. And it's not that we don't hear a lot of very good performances and really great records. But this particular album, and every now and then we run into something like this, when I put that up, it's just that there's this extra thing that you notice that's kind of like connecting emotionally to you more than other recordings that you usually hear. And that thing was really something like a step in a new direction in a way. And in those days, a lot of people were afraid of bottom end and punch and various things like that, because in way back then, a lot of the cutting systems couldn't handle it. You know, bottom end was difficult. Even phase shift was a problem in disc cutting. So a lot of people were conservative on the bottom end back in those days. But this particular one, they went ahead and just put out all that energy, and we were able to get that on the disc. But the disc looks pretty scary when you look at an original. But it tracked. We made it track. But those things are harder to cut. But it was so good that I wanted to capture it on the mastering. But it did stand out. It was one of those things where it's like when I put that up, I went, wow, this is like in a whole new category here. Is this a new direction? And it just grabs you. There's something about it. And so I was pretty sure it would be successful. Yeah, there was no doubt in my mind.
Bill, what do you think?
I remember very distinctly taking a cassette every night and popping it in the car on my way home. And after about the second night, third night, I'm going, what in the world is this? It's not jazz, but it's a little jazzy. You know, it's definitely got pop sensibility. Sometimes a teeny taste of blues. I mean, it's just an amalgam, and yet it's its own thing, and that's what it is. It is its own thing. And I listened, you know, musically first, funny enough, as an engineer, and sonically second. But I was listening to the music completely and not what I had done, you know, first and foremost. And I was blown away. I don't remember whether I thought it was going to be a hit or not, but I knew that it was incredible. It was astounding. Every night was just astounding.
Yeah,
Can y'all, I
the
mean,
same way.
how good is y'all's memory? I mean, do y'all remember like vividly, like going in the studio and all that? I mean, or is it just so long ago?
There's not a lot of, unfortunately, a lot of, the details are kind of funny. There was, for instance, I don't know why this, Joe Sample, there was a movie theater next door to the studio, and he like myself, he loved popcorn, and he would come over, he would go get a bucket of popcorn, and he was in the studio eating it, and it was dropping on the floor, and I was following him, picking it up so that it wouldn't get ground into the guy's carpet there and stuff. It's those kind of oddball memories that I have more than anything, funny, sadly enough.
Yeah. And so did you and Bernie, were y'all friends way back then?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Well, we're part of the audiophile community, actually. Yeah, with Doug Sachs and everybody. Yeah, we were all in the. We were. Yeah, that was kind of what.
That was a very esoteric
in
thing.
each other. Yeah, getting us interested in each other. We knew each other's work.
What,
Sometimes you don't see the people, but you know about their work, and you know that they're the people that are going for the quality.
I'll always remember Bernie. It had to be 73, something like that. Doug and I were at Musso's, and he spotted you, and he said, "Come here, I want to introduce you to somebody." And we walked over, and he said, "Bill, this is the best mastering engineer in the city, Bernie Grundman."
That's a funny. Yeah, well, I'll tell you, yeah, he was. I had him for comic relief a lot of times on my panels at the AES, because he was just a funny. His humor, I loved his humor. Doug Sachs's humor was really terrific.
Absolutely.
And I mean, look, here's an example. I had 4 mastering engineers on a panel, and at a panel discussion about mastering, and I was introducing everyone and so forth, and we were talking about, we were getting feedback from the audience, and this one guy stood up and with the microphone, and he said, "Gee," he says, "you guys have all this, the latest equipment or whatever, you're able to do this." He says, where I'm from, it's very difficult to keep up with all of this stuff." And Doug says, "Oh, you from Pasadena?" He was from way northern Alaska or something, but but that's Doug for you. "Oh, you're from Pasadena, huh?"
Yeah, one of the times I went to dinner with Doug, he brought me to that restaurant you're talking about. I guess it's a famous
Oh yeah,
place.
It's really the
Very famous.
old famous restaurant in Hollywood. Yeah.
Known
Yeah.
as the oldest restaurant in Hollywood. It was in a different location, but it's.
Yeah. Yeah, they're still there.
Yep.
Yeah, I went there another time and it was really hard to get in. It's a good restaurant.
So Chad, when is Gaucho coming out?
Well, me and Bernie been working on it. He's cut a couple of test lacquer. I mean, we've done a couple of test pressings, and I mean, they are already awesome. I mean, if we put it out, the cut he just made, everybody be blown away. But I asked him to just tweak it just a bit, like just the slightest bit. If you could just tweak it a bit, and we got the lacquers today. So it's interesting that you asked. I have everything here. I have the jackets, the labels, the inserts, the box. Since we have our own plating, we can get right to it. So I'll be listening to test pressings real soon, maybe 10 days. And I feel real confident that this will be the one. But again, what he did before was killer. I just, hey, we got one chance at knocking this out the park, you know what I mean? And we'll see what he did. I talked to him earlier today, and he said he felt pretty good about it. So that makes me happy.
Well, the interesting thing with these projects that we're doing is that you want to hear the actual pressing. Because, you know, if I make a lacquer, the lacquer's superior to the pressing. I mean, it's just perfect. I mean, if you A-B'd on our disc, we have a playback for calibration and stuff right on the lathe. So we can cut something and listen to it on the next revolution. We can just switch back and forth from what we're cutting, what we're sending it, and what we're hearing on the playback. And our system is so accurate, it's basically impossible to hear the difference. But after it's pressed, depending on the quality of the plating and the pressing and so forth, and his whole operation is really good, but he wants to hear it. He wants to wait the 3 or 4 days to get a test to really see if the final product is what he wants. And that's, I don't know of anyone else that does that. That's a real luxury.
Not
real
that
luxury.
many people have a plating facility
I
and a
know.
press, but yeah, I mean, the lacquer is so present, man. When I get a lacquer from you or Doug or Kevin or Ryan, I mean, they always just blow me away. I mean, I'm like, wow, the presence is like so clear and direct. And I'm like, the records don't, I mean, I wish the records did sound just like so I don't really like to go by it, you know, because I want to hear, especially since we have our own plating and pressing, it still costs a lot of money and it costs a lot of time. And, oh, and I figure most of you mastering engineers I use nail it on the first time. So I can already be ready to make the records. Like if I like it, we don't have to, like if you sent me a lacquer, hey,
Yeah.
and Doug used to want to do it a lot. Hey man, let me send you a lacquer. Please let me send you a lacquer. And I'd be like, well, go ahead and cut it on the 14-inch. I'll plate it because if we like it, which is most likely we will, I save all that time and all that money. And I really get to listen to what the consumer's going to hear. And I'm always going to be a little bit more impressed with the lacquer. It's just, but I like having the lacquers, you know, like to collectability and the sound. But
Well, I know some people that audiophile people, what they'll do is I'll master an album for them and they'll be pressing it and all of that. And at the audio show, though, they have me cut some refs. So that at the audio show, they play this new album from the ref, from the lacquer.
yeah.
And then everybody goes, wow, you know, and they go out and buy it.
Well, chances are it's going to be close, you know, but I'd have to say it's a bit of a, I mean, you know, not to say that I wouldn't do that if I had a lacquer, because it, you know, you want to blow everybody away, but the final product, it's going to be close and it's going to show you what it is.
Well, no, if you do a really good job and have a great plating and pressing, good vinyl and all, everything is done properly and in the best way. Yeah, the pressing can be pretty close though.
Yeah. It can be if, so Bill, you've moved to Nashville, huh?
Yep. 5 years ago.
Oh, it's been that long. Wow. That's been a while. Or you have your own studio, or you use other people's studios, or?
Yeah, I have. It's so funny. I have a mix room at home, and you know what? About 20 years ago, I'd say when I had the big studio in LA, there was a move afloat when people started having home studios. Now, this was before the digital revolution, where anybody could put in a studio. It cost, you know, a cheap studio would be $150,000, $200,000 for everything to be done right. And and all the studios got together, and there was some organization that was out to get them shut down, and actually did. And I remember back then thinking, you know, a studio in the house, you know, I like getting up and getting dressed and going to work, and at the end of the day coming home. I like that. Well, now I like getting up at 6:30 and mixing in my boxers. I don't know what to tell you.
Well, they both got their pluses and minuses, you know.
Exactly.
But sometimes if you're a workaholic and you got a lot of work, you don't know when to stop, you know.
Yeah, and that is a problem. That is a problem.
The whole world
I had to promise my wife that mixes would never be attended, which they are less and less and less these days. So we got that for it, but yeah, it's been great.
How is the book doing?
Good, really good. Reviews have been fantastic, so I'm happy about that.
Well, you know, I saw one of the videos where a guy interviewed you. There's almost like 500,000 views. I mean, it's unbelievable how many views. Well, I'm sure this one with Donald and Bill with you and Bernie will be up there. But yeah, it's a great book. It's a great book, and
Thanks.
I think audiophiles should know about it. We're going to put a link to it, and I just really appreciate you guys, man. Like we said earlier, it takes a team. You know, it takes Fred to get the word out there. It takes the musician. You know, it starts from the instrument to the microphone to the recording to the mastering to the plating to the pressing. And you know, I think Fred said something like, "How could it be? You know, is it going to be like when moving an instrument up a half a dB? Is it going to be a different?"
Yeah.
But the thing is if you take if you upgrade 10 different things just a little bit, it makes one big thing.
Yeah, that's
know-
what I saw in that mixing session that I was watching. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, you know, it starts with the musician, the instrument, the microphone, the recording. It starts there, but if everything is high quality and you do something just a little bit better in every aspect from the beginning till the final aspect, those little differences, 10 little differences add up to one big difference. And, you know,
Right.
there's some people that will do the first 8 things really well, the best, and then they'll get to the mastering and cheap out, or they'll have Bernie, and they'll say, send the lacquers to such and such plant to plate and such plant to press, and all y'all's beautiful work gets, you know,
Not
it
gonna
was
turn
There's
out
a
that-
lot of examples of that. There
No.
are plenty of, one-man studios out there that think that that part of it isn't all that important. So they cut corners on that, and yet they wreck the whole thing,
We
unfortunately.
run into that all the time, and we end up redoing a lot of stuff too.
Yeah.
yeah. I mean,
Pressings don't even come out like the master. You know, I mean, just
Yeah,
not at all.
right. No, I've heard this. I've heard this.
I'll bet you, Bill, there's a lot of times you recorded a masterpiece and didn't come out quite as good as you remembered or as good as
Yeah.
it could have been, I bet.
Yeah, well, I always tried to follow it through to make sure that that kind of thing didn't happen as best you can, but you can't control everything or everyone. So
Yeah. Well, I mean, you and Doug had a long relationship, and I know you knew Bernie. So I mean, you knew who to use. It's just maybe the labels, you know, they see a cheaper price.
Yeah.
And
And
you
to
get
them,
what
they think it's
well-
pretty much the same thing. So what the hell? Yeah.
Yeah, that's the misconception. The misconception is that a lot of these people in the production departments of nowadays in the record companies and stuff, they think that, well, pressing is everybody just does it. It's the same thing no matter where you go, and they look for price, or they think that it's just a mechanical operation,
Mhm.
and it all of it makes a big difference on the sound quality.
Yeah.
It just does, and they don't know that. They just think they can send it anywhere.
Well, I think y'all had an awesome team on Asia. I mean, from Bill and the other engineers, and then the Bernie cutting it, and you know, of course, the music. And I mean, the drummers, man, they had the best drummers.
Oh yeah, yeah, they did, yeah.
Well, every instrument actually. I think if there was one record, you know, if you'd say, you know, this is perfection or as close to perfection, this might be it, you know, and
It's definitely up in that category. It's definitely
Yeah.
up in that category. One of the better sounding and better mixed albums, and performance as well. I mean, everything kind of came together. That's why it is so special.
Well, Chad, keep it up. Let us know when Gaucho is coming out. Maybe we'll do this again.
I really want to thank Bernie. I want to thank Bill and you, Fred, and Donald for doing this.
See you next time.
Very
right,
good.
hey,
Talking
thank-
with both of you guys. Really a pleasure to meet you, even if just in this format.
Well,
Great.
nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you guys. Well,
Okay, so long,
All right,
Chad.
thank you all. We'll see y'all all later. Bye-bye.
all righty.
Very good.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you all.
Please like and subscribe for more audiophile content.